Hello, my pretties, and welcome to Pretty Jazz Podcast. This series is Serial Killers Unfiltered. Thanks for tuning in. Stay tuned, episode 1's coming on up. Today's episode, Serial Killers Unfiltered, Mr. Ed Gein, aka the Butcher of Plainfield, aka Leatherface, along with so many other horrible names. We are going to talk about today Ed Gein. Episode 1, Mr. Ed Gein. Ed Gein grew up in a dictatorial household dominated by a controlling mother. After her death in 1945, his mental health disintegrated. After Gein was apprehended as a suspect in 1957 for murder, this investigation shined a light on a highly disturbed man who kept human organs and made wearable clothing and accessories out of body parts. For the rest of his life, he was institutionalized. Some movies and stories were inspired by his gruesome acts. A few examples: Norman Bates, Psycho, Buffalo Bill, The Silence of the Lambs. This is the story of Ed Gein. Edward Theodore Gein was born in La Crosse, Wisconsin on August 27, 1906. The second of two boys born to George Philip Gein and Augusta Wilhelmine Gein. Edward had an older brother named Henry. Edward left the farm only to attend school. Outside of school, most of his time was spent doing chores on the farm. Edward was very shy, and classmates and teachers are often remembered saying that he had very strange mannerisms, such as seemingly random laughter, as if he were laughing at his own personal jokes that no one else knew of or heard. To make matters worse, his mother punished him whenever he tried to make friends. She didn't want him to be a part of the outside world. Despite his poor social development, Edward did fairly in school, particularly in reading. His mother, who was very, very religious, nominally Lutheran, frequently preached to her sons about the immortality of the world, the evil of drinking, and her disbelief that all women, excluding herself, were predominantly promiscuous and they were instruments of the devil. Every afternoon, she read to them from the Bible, mostly using verses from the Old Testament and the book of Revelation, which were concerning death, murder, and divine retribution. His mother hated her husband. He was an alcoholic, unfortunately, who was unable to keep a job. He had worked at various jobs, such as a carpenter, insurance salesman, and a tanner. While they were in La Crosse, Edward's father owned a local grocery shop, but he soon sold the business and left the big city with his family. They moved to an isolated farm on 155 acres in the town of Plainfield, Wisconsin. There became the permanent residence of the family. The mother took advantage of the farm's isolation by turning any outsiders away. On May 16, 1944, while Edward was burning away marsh vegetation on the property, the fire got out of control, drawing attention of the local fire department. By the end of the day, the fire had been extinguished by the firefighters. Edward's brother had gone missing. With lanterns and flashlights, a search party searched for the 43-year-old Henry. His body was eventually found lying face down. Apparently, he had been dead for some time. Supposedly, the cause of death was heart failure since he had not been burned or injured. that they could visibly see. It was later reported that Henry had bruises on his head, but the police dismissed the possibility of foul play, and the county coroner later officially listed asphyxiation as the cause of death. The authorities accepted the accident theory, but no official investigation was conducted, and an autopsy was not performed. Now, with Henry deceased, Edward and Augusta were now alone. Augusta, Edward's mother, had a stroke, paralyzing her shortly after Henry's death, and Edward devoted himself to taking care of her. Sometime in 1945, he and his mother visited a man named Smith, who lived nearby, to purchase straw. According to Edward, Augusta witnessed Smith beating a dog. A woman inside the Smith's residence came outside and yelled for him to stop, but Smith beat the dog to death. Edward's mother, Augusta, was extremely upset by this scene. However, what bothered her did not appear to be the brutality toward the dog, but rather the presence of the woman. His mother told him the woman was not married to Smith, so she had no business being there. And she called her Smith's harlot. She had a second stroke soon after, and her health deteriorated rapidly. Unfortunately for Edward, Augusta died on December 29, 1945, at the age of 67. Edward was devastated by her death. In the words of a close friend, he lost his only friend and one true love, and he was absolutely alone in the world. Edward held on to the farm, and he earned money from odd jobs. What he did was board the rooms up used by his mother, including upstairs, downstairs parlor, and the living room, leaving them untouched, while the rest of the house became increasingly trashed. These rooms remained pristine. Edward lived there in a small room next to the kitchen. Around this time, he became very interested in reading pulp magazines, adventure stories, and particularly those involving cannibals or Nazi atrocities, specifically concerning Alkosh, who selected tattooed prisoners for death in order to fashion lampshades and other items from their skin. Edward received a farm subsidy from the federal government that began in 1951. So occasionally he worked for a local municipal road crew and crop threshing crew in the Plainfield area, sometime between 1946 and 56. He also sold 80 acres of the land he owned. Well, the land he and Henry owned. On the morning of November 16, 1957, Bernice Warden disappeared. A 58-year-old Plainfield hardware store owner, she just disappeared. The hardware store's truck was seen driving out from the rear of the building around 9:30 a.m. The hardware store saw few customers during the entire day. Some area residents believe that this was because of deer hunting season. Warden's son was the deputy sheriff, Mr. Frank Warden. He entered the store around 5 p.m. to find the cash register open and bloodstains on the floor. The sheriff told investigators that on the morning before his mother's disappearance, Ed had been in the store and was to have returned the next morning for a gallon of antifreeze. A sales slip for the antifreeze was the last receipt written by Mrs. Warden on the morning that she disappeared. That evening, Edward was arrested at the West Plainfield grocery store. Sheriff's Department searched Edward's farm. A sheriff's deputy discovered Miss Bernice Warden's decapitated body in a shed on Edward's property, hung upside down by her legs with a crossbar in her ankles and ropes at her wrists. The torso was dressed out like a deer. She had been shot with a .22 caliber rifle, and the mutilations were made after her death. Searching the house, authorities found the following: whole human bones and fragments, a wastebasket made of human skin covering several chair seats, skulls on his bedpost, female skulls, some with the top sawn off, bowls made from human skulls, a corset made from a female torso, skinned from shoulder to waist, leggings made from human leg skin, masks made from the skin of female heads, Mary Hogan's face mask in a paper bag, Mary Hogan's skull in a box, Bernice Warden's entire head in a burlap sack, Bernice Warden's heart in a plastic bag in front of Edward's potbelly stove, 9 vulva in a shoebox, a young girl's dress, the vulvas of 2 females judged to have been about 15 years old, a belt made from female human nipples, 4 noses, a pair of lips on a window shade drawstring, a lampshade made from skin of a human face, and fingernails from female fingers are the items the investigators found in Edward's home and on his property and various sheds around the property. Edward went on trial November 21st, 1957. Edward Gein went on trial November 21st, 1957. Arraigned on 1 count of first-degree murder in Washara County Court, where he pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia and found mentally incompetent, thus far unfit for trial. He was sent to Central State Hospital for the Criminally Insane, now called Dodge Correctional Institution, a maximum security facility in Waupun. And later he was transferred to the Mendota State Hospital in Madison. In 1968, doctors determined Edward was mentally able to confer with counsel and participate in his defense. Therefore, trial originally began November 7, 1968, and lasted 1 week. A psychiatrist testified that Edward had told him that he did not know whether the killing of Warden was intentional or accidental. Edward had told him that while he examined a gun in Warden's store, the weapon discharged and killed Warden. He said he had not aimed the rifle and fired at her, and did not remember anything else that morning. At the request of the defense, Edward's trial was held without a jury. Presiding Judge Robert H. Gallmer, Edward was found guilty by Gallmer on November 14th. A second trial dealt with Edward's sanity, After testimony by doctors for prosecution and defense, Gomer ruled Edward not guilty by reason of insanity and ordered him committed to Central State Hospital for the criminally insane. Edward spent the rest of his life in a mental hospital. While all of that was going on, Edward still owned a house and 195 acres of property, which was appraised at $4,700 at the time. Current time, $48,000. His possessions were scheduled to be auctioned March 30th, 1958. Amidst the rumors that the house and the land it stood on might become a tourist attraction, early on the morning of March 20th, the house was destroyed, set ablaze. A deputy marshal reported that a garbage fire had been set 75 feet from the house by a cleaning crew who was given the task of disposing of refuse, and the hot coals that were recovered from the spot of the bonfire were not along the ground from the location of the house. Early on the morning of March 20th, the house was destroyed by fire. A deputy marshal reported that a garbage fire had been set 75 feet from the house by a cleaning crew who was given the task of disposing of refuse. That hot coals were recovered from the spot of the bonfire, but that the fire did not spread along the ground from that location to the house. Arson was suspected, but the cause of the fire was never officially determined. It is possible that the fire was not considered a matter of urgency by the fire chief, who was Frank Warden, son of the victim, Bernice Warden. Edwards learned of the incident while in detention. He shrugged his shoulders, just as well. Edward died at the Mendota Mental Health Institute due to respiratory failure and lung cancer on July 26, 1984, at the age of 77. Edward's story has had a lasting effect on American pop culture, as by its numerous appearances in film, music, and in literature, and as well as here on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a wonderful day. Thanks for stopping by Pretty Jazz Podcast, Serial Killers, Unfiltered Edition. See you later. Bye.